welcome back to another episode of Romantic Dinner with the DM. Today, we're joined by Masood.
And you've got me, Prime, and the excellent Arcad.
Thank you so much. Masood, say hello. How you doing?
Hi, everyone. I'm Masood Haque. I'm doing pretty good. Having a blast. Excited to be spending this dinner with you all, and ready to talk about everything that you all want to get into in terms of tabletop RPG.
Oh, pretty much everything. Absolutely everything. And like this is a digression-friendly podcast, you know? So
wonderful.
If you
got it.
Yeah. Take those tangents and run with them. This is the place for it.
Perfect.
I've put up wallpaper on my place in Digression Island. I love it there. It's wonderful. It's cozy as all get out. But yeah, so I guess we will just jump right into it. And so if there were a TTRPG version of Tinder, what would your bio look like?
This is tough for me. I have been in relationship with my now wife for like 6 years. And so prior to that, I hadn't really used Tinder much. And when I did use it, was very bad at it. So I don't know if I met my wife at work. So that, like, if that tells you anything, like, I was very lucky. And in terms of my bio, I think it would say is comedy first over drama, but leave space for both. Also loves cats. I think that would have to be it. Yeah.
Oh, short.
That's
and
perfect.
Sweet.
I love that.
Yeah, I like that. And I've got to circle back to this just because
Sure.
I hope there's a story behind it. When you say you were terrible at Tinder, because both Prime and I also essentially missed the entire Tinder wave, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
We also, so we're, 3 people sat around talking about something we've barely used, but
Hey, listen, I used Tinder extremely successfully once because I got stranded at an airport in Houston. I needed to be in Austin. I thought, hey, I'll use this app. I'll put it in my bio that I'm not looking for anything particular, but I just need a ride to Austin. And if somebody could give me a ride to Austin, I could give them tickets to the festival I was playing in Austin. And you know what? Made a lifelong friend. Okay.
There you go.
So
that is it has to be an outlier case. Like the one time you used it,
100%.
Nothing but amazing. I wish I had that batting average. My goodness.
Oh no! Well, I will say it wasn't the one time. There was some failures, but since that was the like kind of crux of it, I was like, all right, you know what? This is great. I'm gonna go out on that story. That is a good story. We don't need to talk about the strange people. No, we don't know. No,
we don't need to worry about those people. They're gone. They're forgotten.
Think about the ones who respond and go, "Hey, I would love to help drive you. People are weird though. I can pick you up with my mom if that'll make you feel better." Those are the good people.
Those are the good ones.
That's a good person. That is a genuinely good human being.
Right?
It is.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And so when you were self-proclaimed bad at Tinder, was it you who determined yourself being bad at it, or did someone come out and say, Masood, come on, man?
So I kind of just assumed that I was bad at it based on like how I was going into it, because I think also knowing who I am, I don't know if I read best if you don't meet me, right? If you're not like interacting with me in some capacity. Also, I don't think I think I knew it going in, but my like messaging game wasn't very good, because I thought I had to be like, I was one of those people that was like, hey, how are you? Right. And now understanding a little bit more about the game, and because as my single friends have told me, it is like a game. If you get inundated with like so many messages that say, hey, how are you? You're not going to respond to that. That's irrelevant to you.
Yeah.
And so I tried changing it up, but the thing I would always ask would end up being the same, because it was the only thing I thought was good, which was, hey, what's been the most recent thing in your Netflix queue? And I was like, look at this icebreaker question I'm tossing out there. But later, I was talking to some friends after I had started dating Misha, and one of my friends, Liz, had mentioned, I was like, yeah, I don't think I was very good at the messaging part of online dating. And they looked at me and was like, yeah, I could see that. And I still don't know what that means. I still want to ask them about it. But
oh my goodness.
Fine.
They just threw you right under that bus.
But it's
they threw it, and it was a read that I had read myself, but I was like, what about you seeing me gives you that insight?
Fair enough.
That's
Fair
amazing.
enough. But
Yeah.
hey, it all worked out. You have your beautiful wife,
yeah.
the Tinder
I'm
of it
very
all.
happy.
Unnecessary.
Exactly.
Unnecessary.
Totally.
Maybe if I need a ride though, I'll use it just in
Yeah.
case if I can't get an Uber.
A
Yeah.
lot
Exactly.
of other applications people don't even consider. You just got humans at your fingertip. I don't know. I think
Really,
it's
right?
fascinating.
There's an untapped potential there. Tinder, we know you're listening. Open up the brand awareness. This is your moment.
I will say, like, it's an underrated, because, well, see, the thing with me is I used to travel a lot, right? So, like, while I was backpacking through Europe, it's the same thing. It's like, sure, you could use, like, you know, the Babbel thing where you get to do carpooling with other people, or you can just use the app everybody's already on anyways. And just be like, hey, does anybody just, like, want to, like, hang out and be friends, though? Do you want to, like, go on a date style thing, but as homies? And surprisingly, more people than you'd expect are like, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
pretty sweet. But
And the people who say no are probably not even worth your time to begin with.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But I know listeners at this point, you're probably very confused. You thought you were listening to a D&D podcast.
No.
Very confusing. I understand.
We told them about the Digression Island at the beginning, though.
That's
They
true.
should know.
We warned
Yeah.
them. You were warned, folks.
We're paddling our way back. Don't worry.
We are. To get us right back onto the mainland, let's start with this. So, Masood, tell us a bit about your history with TTRPGs, where you started, where you got to, and especially, you know, you have recently finished up a major sort of accomplishment. So let's hear just a little bit about all of it.
Sure. I started playing tabletop role-playing games in like 2013, 2012, maybe even early as 2011. It was I was early in college, and I was come back home, and one of my buddies was like, "Hey, our friend Sebastian, who we haven't seen in a while, was thinking he'd love to be a DM for us. He wanted to try it out." And I was like, "Oh, sure, that sounds fun." And we played a very fast and loose game of Pathfinder that involved us wrangling a chupacabra as our pet, and it was a delightful time. So I started there and played it a little bit with this group of friends every once in a while. But then, you know, everyone just sort of got busy and life got in the way, and I kind of fell off on it. And I had done like a couple campaigns here or there with a couple buds, like one shots, but that was like really like the longest one I'd been committed to. And then one day, I'm in Chicago. I'm an actor and a comedian, and I was on set for this web series that was being shot about folks who were in waiting rooms for like the emergency room, folks who were just like wait and like what are their stories. And in my episode, Serena Marie and Carlos Luna were two rotating characters who like were also there. I didn't know much about them, but I knew Carlos and Serena were playing these like D&D characters, and they kind of did stuff in that space. And I just kind of like floated it to Carlos. I was like, "Hey, it's nice to meet you. You're really funny. If you ever doing something around that and want an extra hand, let me know." And I thought I didn't understand the scope of like what his involvement was. I was like, "Oh, you know, you're running your own thing." But like 4 to 5 months later, I get an email from him reaching out to me about doing stuff in a campaign for this website, Roll20. And he's like, "Hey, I'm building this new group together, and I was wondering if you'd be interested in playing." And like met and chat with him. And yeah, it's kind of been a whirlwind since then. It's been like 2 years. That was in 2019. So then when I started doing the show with him and my friend Katie May and TK Johnson, and then we joined on Solani Bailey, and now we're the Indoor Recess crew, or just Indoor Recess, and we've been together running shows over at Roll20 for a little bit. We're got our season finale of this 5th edition homebrew game that we've been playing called Generation Fantasy, where I get to play the absolute worst PC you have ever met. His name is Kent Vanderbilt, and he is atrocious, and it's so much fun. It's the group is so good. I really love playing with them, and I feel so safe, and I know they feel safe knowing that, like, I check in with them after every episode. It's like, "Hey, did I go too far? Was it so?" And they're like, "No, that felt in line with like the character." And yeah, it's a blast. So I do that. That's kind of like how I got into the space and how I'm like in the space now. I also with Roll20 run had been running the show Monster of the Week. That was a partnership with like Evil Hat Productions and some buddies from Chicago. There's an improv and comedy troupe called Stir Friday Night, all Asian comedy collective that's been around for close to 30 years. And when pandemic hit, a bunch of my acting buddies kind of didn't have other ways of performance and outlets. But since I was doing this TTRPG stuff, I like pitched this idea of partnering with them and Roll20, and thankfully we were running a show for a little bit, which was a whole lot of fun. So I do that. That just ended, and then the last thing, God, and when I say it out loud, I realize I do a lot, and I don't realize it until it's vocalized. But I was just this recent season's GM of Rivals of Waterdeep, and that was so much fun. God, it was such a blast playing for them and building a story that was built on this history, and also in a lot of fun ways to do the like talk back, because this was the road to 100 for our within Rivals. This was the 10th season. Every season's 10 episodes, and we hit 100 episodes by the end of it, and we had the old cast members come back, and I was like chatting with the other people there, and one of the people there is now Carlos as well, because he was a former Rivals. It was just a blast. And that's why I'm here. I'm having fun. I'm having so much fun in this space.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
That is just like, what
I can
a
hear the
journey.
excitement in your voice, like just as you talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun, man. I don't know. I have a good time doing it, and especially like coming from the world of performance that I've been in, doing like Chicago style comedy and like improv, particularly at like the institutions that are here. So much of this space, at least prior to when I was in the TTRPG world, like so much of that like comedy space is predicated on you got to be hustling. Like anytime you're not out, someone else is. It's like so much about like the true business side of things, and like whether or not who's going to see you, who's going to be there, and like I don't know, so much is built on the idea of exposure and having relevance, and like potentially getting onto the next thing, like chance based in some ways it feels like. That is hard to keep the fun of also doing comedy at the forefront, a lot of it. And I think the people who are really good at it are able to do it, and their content is amazing. And there's other people who fake it, and it's you can kind of tell, but it's if they're good at it, you can't even notice. But with like the TTRPG space, I feel like it's inherently play. It is always inherently play. And I think the good shows prioritize that, and it comes out.
Absolutely. And I think that that's such an important part of it too, because the thing with TTRPGs, and I think that a lot of people don't really understand it when they don't kind of know what they are and when they don't understand the premise, but it is such an incredible creative outlet for people who like acting, who like writing, who like storytelling. Heck, even for musicians, right? Like we all know that bard friend who never gets to actually use their guitar and or cello and is like, all right, I can do this now. And the fact that it can be something where, you know, you'll see folks who are so creative and who do still kind of have that creative / business mind turn it into these full productions online. I feel it just opens up a space that usually is very, very hard to feel safe or welcome or even to feel safe pursuing. I think it turns that into something that has so much more potential, and it's just incredible.
Yeah, the amount of inherent like teamwork that happens in this community story building space is like you're saying, it allows so many people to contribute in so many beautiful ways that leads to like part of the reasons why I really loved improv and like getting into it was like that aspect of it. But it feels I've just loved the experience of the TTRPG around it.
That's amazing.
Fair enough.
And I've got to ask, because of the just wrapping up Rivals of Waterdeep on this 10th season. You know, you mentioned how when you were doing it, all these people, all these players, all these contributors to it from the previous 9 seasons were part of it with you. How did it feel, kind of like continuing on, like obviously managing and wrangling episode 100? is no small feat. And how did it feel sort of being in that being in that seat and seeing all these people who had laid the groundwork and put all this stuff in the previous seasons and culminated in the season that you were running?
To be honest, it felt, I didn't think about it too much, because I think what I really thought about was I wanted to do a good show for the 100th. I wanted the 100th and like this season to be enjoyable for people watching. Like I think that was the utmost thing at my mind, and thankfully for like the people that I was working with, they were kind of there helping me answer that question of like sort of checking it when I did it before the season started. I met with all of the current cast members and I was like, hey, what are some things you want to see? What are things you're expecting? What do you want out of the season? And so having these people who had also been in the GM's chair, or other individuals who were just playing and been around, who had like also been fans for a while, maybe even like, and I know some of them like had been listening like consistently longer than I had. It felt like I had resources there present to draw on and build the show, while also trying to put like my own like a little bit of a signature on it, my own little stamp to like the ever-growing world that is Rivals.
That's fair. That makes a lot of sense.
A good combination of community, but also freedom. Like
yeah. I think also like the amount of respect that they have, everyone at that table, for whoever's in the GM's chair, and like, hey, wherever you take us, we're going to be on the ride for you. Felt really good, and I think that is probably what also led to it feeling like so cohesive in terms of, or at least what I wanted to do in terms of tying back Rivals to Waterdeep, to their city. Yeah,
that's beautiful.
I love that. And so obviously, you know, in that sort of situation, as you're saying, there's the community and you've got sort of the resources and things like that. But so is that kind of the main difference between running that sort of a campaign where it's, you know, primarily for content and to continue something that is very community based versus running for friends? Or what would you say the differences are there?
I think ultimately both things have this energy where I want to make my friends or whoever's at the table laugh. And I think, or like have a good time, because for different reasons. One, if it's like for my friends, and it's like for us, if they're having a good time, I know that if I'm like as a GM, I know that I'm doing my job. Like that's how I check in, because ultimately we're playing a game, and I want to see like, are you interested in the story? Do you like the drama? Are you laughing at the funny bits, at that silly NPC that I made? You know what I mean? Like, are you having fun? Mm-hmm. Versus for an audience, I think there's ways in which it's that, but also is it in line with what you want to really like build for your character, or what we want to say? Because I think in a lot of ways for an audience, there's you're in front of a group, and you're at least for like Rivals, like you have folks who come in. It's been 10 seasons. There are folks who are involved, and you want to make sure you're doing service to them. You want to respect the folks who are tuning in and sort of who aren't there having fun directly, but are experiencing it secondhand through you all. And like, yeah, I think there's a mindfulness more of that viewership than there is when it's, for me, that's the main difference.
Right. You just thinking about the enjoyment of everybody, not only at the table, but out there watching and listening and getting to participate in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds like such a kind of special balance to walk, and I love like, especially for someone like yourself who comes with this comedic background, this improvisational background. Like it must be in some ways like I won't say like the ultimate test or the ultimate challenge or whatever, but there's got to be a certain amount of like, you're talented at this, and you've got this capability, and so it must feel very satisfying in a way to kind of flex in that manner.
Mm-hmm. Let me tell you what, it's helpful when you've had to go to auditions and know you've bombed immediately afterwards, to know, like, it's helpful to have had experience in those spaces. And the biggest thing that I've like really learned out of all those times that I've like had to perform for an audience, at least from improv and like comedy that I think translates exactly to the TTRPG space is that if an audience sees you all having fun, they will have fun. So if everyone at the table is having a good time, like truly in a way that is representative, I think you can kind of trust the audience to go along with it. But you also have to know the energy of who's there, right? And like what is like entertainment for those folks, as well as what might not be or what is comfortable for us to like even present and speak to.
Right. Kind
Absolutely.
of hearkening back to what you were saying before about, having a good healthy dose of comedy, but not shying away from the drama when it's appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's like I have, at a very pivotal age in my teenage years, I read a book of poetry that by this Lebanese poet Khalil Gibran that I like really loved, and there was this poem in it that really has always like stuck with me. And it's this guy who there's like this prophet who's leaving his town, and when he's leaving, all the people from the town come up to him and ask him a lesson about life. And one of the things that people ask about is like joy and sorrow. And like one of the just beautiful lines in that is like, is not the same lute that soothes your soul carved by the carpenter's knife. And like the idea that you like, in some ways they are linked, right? It's like the Greek say of the comedy and tragedy mask, like, and why I think Jordan Peele is such a great, like, scary movie director, like a horror film director, because he can understand tension and the balance of releasing it when you need to for a laugh, and when it needs to build for discomfort for the right reasons.
Absolutely.
That's a fantastic perspective on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Folks, I feel like that is one thing that is so crucial to, telling a good story, but also to comedy, because you've got comedic timing and you have so many things you have to factor in. But the ability to build atmosphere, that is everything, right? Whether the atmosphere is somewhere you're safe to feel silly, or if it's an atmosphere that's meant to put you on edge, like that is a skill, an underappreciated skill, I think.
Agreed.
Absolutely. I think I'm getting nerdy about comedy stuff because I like talking about it sometimes. This
is the place.
Like this is it. There's an autobiography by Steve Martin, Born Standing Up, that I read, and he talks about in his like how he approaches comedy, and like how it all leads back to like a college class that he had, and he was walking in, and it was a biology class. And the professor asked, does anyone know why, like, animals laugh? Like, why is this an evolutionary thing that we see in nature? And he explained that it's to release tension. Like, at the very, like, early stages, like, when something would go out and see something scary, it would build this tension. And then when it would go and realize that it was nothing really there, it would release it like a laugh, like, as a biological understanding of it. And so, like, I think as, like, humans is, like, these animals that we still are, I think that like tension is the thing I love playing with. I think in the right ways where you feel safe to do the right things that you want to do, you can use it to speak to a lot of stuff and make people also feel safe to address, and also like tell different stories that you might not usually get to.
That's amazing. And what better medium than, especially like incorporating all of those elements, like I love how you're taking all these lessons from comedians, from poets, from the people who inspire you, obviously, like very, very deeply to your core, and just applying that to your passions, and in ways that I'm pretty sure Steve Martin might not have thought of his stuff being applied to. If I could run a game with Steve and Martin Short, I would. That's it. I just want them two and me. That's all I want, and that would be a blast. I would watch that.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? Selena Gomez and them are in a new Hulu movie. Bring her along as well. Let's round it out. Let's do a new marketing campaign for that.
Oh, that's perfect.
Speak it into the universe. Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
There it is.
There it is. So let's shift gears a little bit here into like the sort of meat and potatoes of the game systems for a minute here. So obviously, Rivals of Waterdeep, as the name itself would suggest, pretty firmly planted in the Dungeons and Dragons universe and kind of mythos. And I think you mentioned the other one was also set in 5e as well.
With Generation Fantasy.
Generation Fantasy, that was it, yes. Do you find yourself, like, is Dungeons and Dragons the TTRPG that you're most comfortable in, the one you like? And do you like to run game systems outside of that, TTRPGs beyond just D&D? Kind of what's your take on the different systems? Which ones do you like? What do you like about each ones? We love just tacking on questions on top of questions. So
sure.
Facts.
Yeah, just kind of give us your take on it all.
I think I've spent the most time with 5th edition. I think I've no, I can say that confidently. I have spent the most time with 5th edition in terms of like podcasts that I've played on, or like TTRPG shows that I've and just like TTRPGs that I've played in terms of hours. It's also like certain podcasts that I've listened to. I also know not all of them have been 5th edition, but I'd still probably say a lot of them are. And because of that, I think I sometimes view things through that lens, where like I'll inherently, like, even if I'm playing another game, want my players to think of and ask, like, make a perception check. Wait, what does that mean for this system? What does that like equate to in this new space? And so I have also played other games which I really like. Like one of the games I mentioned earlier was like Monster of the Week, which doesn't run on the 5th edition system, and I really like it in terms of, outside of the mechanics, the level of like collaborative story spilling that occurs. It's kind of, I think they use like a system that's similar to the Powered by Apocalypse system that uses just like 2 d6 for basically everything. And it's I really liked it because it allows you to shift things, and that, along with some other games that I've really I spent a lot of times with Kids on Bikes as well. And I think both those things do a lot of cool stuff. 5th edition, I feel like, unless you're homebrewing, it kind of sets you into this world that's still like Tolkien-esque inspired in some capacity. And so you're still kind of playing in that version of high fantasy. Versus like Monster of the Week, it takes its inspiration from, you know, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It takes its inspiration from like Supernatural, from X-Files, these other sorts of mediums that we've engaged with, and like kind of lets you play and exist in that. And Kids on Bikes is like just directly, I don't know if I think it predates Stranger Things. I think it does. But it's like playing Stranger Things. It's like that sort of atmosphere and that environment. And like, yeah, they all have different flavors, and I think they can suit a lot of different things for different folks. But I like the lens that they force you to think things through, especially if you are the keeper or game master or dungeon master, whatever the term is for that game. Because I think it's fun to for me anyways, who at the end of the day just really like telling stories. Like, how do you get to tell those stories? How do you get to build them? And how do you get to do it with everyone else at the table with you?
I love that. That's so great. And I think the one thing too is, you know, the different game systems, they really can help sometimes in telling a story, right? Like, you know, maybe something you want to tell wouldn't be the easiest to do with 5e mechanics, but maybe if it's something where you wanted to tell one of those sort of Stranger Things style stories, just knowing that another game system would maybe support that better is kind of cool.
Yeah. And I've recently I was watching the Dimension 20's Misfits of Magic, and they were playing the Kids on Brooms campaign, which is very similar to Kids on Bikes, but they added like some other elements in it that felt really freaking cool, and I really dug it. And like for the story that they were telling, this like satirization of the Harry Potter world through like their lens, was I think it did it. Like you're saying, it allows you to tell different stories, right? It really just like makes it easier. Yeah,
rather than trying to shoehorn everything into this, like you called it, very Tolkien-esque, you know, wizards and elves and dwarves and stuff. It's like, you know, you can, because the fact of the matter is, you can homebrew 5e, and as you said, it's at its best when you homebrew it. But you can homebrew other stuff too. You can like, absolutely, you make your own rules.
Yeah, dude, I'm telling you, that first game, I learned like months later it wasn't Dungeons and Dragons, but in fact Pathfinder. I was like, what? Why does my character sheet say Pathfinder? It's like, because we're not playing Dungeons and Dragons, we were playing Pathfinder. What does that mean? I like it took. I was like, what? That's what this is, right? That's what TTR. And I think like, yeah, ultimately it was just we had a good time, and that's all I really remember. I told you the first thing I recalled, which was that chupacabra, man. Yeah.
And it's gonna stay in your mind forever.
Mm-hmm.
It really, because it was just like that first moment we were in a labyrinth, and it felt like, okay, so it's a labyrinth. We got to solve our problems, these puzzles, defeat the monster that comes our way. And one of my buddies that was with, we came across this chupacabra, and my character got his spear ready, was ready, gonna go attack it, and my other friend just like animal handling or whatever the skill is now, like rolled a nat 20, and it was the first time where I was like, no, things can go off the rails and it's still okay. And like, yeah.
I love that. That's excellent. Mm-hmm. So, from across all of the systems you've played, and we can mostly focus on the 5e2 because that's the one with the most experience, but what do you prefer? Do you prefer being the game master and the world builder, or do you prefer being a player, or is it kind of a mix of both?
I think if you had asked me this like a year ago, I would have said player. Mainly just because this past year I've GM'd a lot, and so I've gotten a little more experience in that way. But now I'm kind of torn. I think it really depends on really kind of who the other people are at the table. And thankfully I've been pretty lucky to be with folks who, if someone prefers being a GM, I will then lean towards being a player. If you want to be the GM, that's an energy. I'm like, okay, there might be something there. Vibe that. Like it feels like in some ways the grenade, I'm not it's not really that dangerous, but I'll hop on it. It's a dud. I'll do it. It's not an issue. But if someone's striving for it, I was like, yes, go for it. And let me feel the story that you're about to tell. Especially if it's homebrewed, or if we're like talking about it in some way that like players are still doing a little bit of the world building, like that's the best. Like doing that character work before you arrive at that table. I think that's what I love a lot.
Mm-hmm. And do you find yourself like, with that, again, with that comedic background, do you find yourself when you're either as a DM or as a player, are you one of the people who puts down like 3 to 10 pages of backstory and writing, or do you prefer to fly a little bit more by the seat of your pants?
I think the writing isn't there, but I have some strong beat points, and I leave some space for like, there's something like thinking about this person. I was like, there's something tragic here, or there's something like really informative about their background that I just don't know yet, that's shaping them to be in this way. That's okay. That's fine that I don't know that. That might be something that I can talk to the GM about, or like we build it up. If it's for like an audience, it might be something like, hey, I was thinking about how this might be. I'd love to explore what it's like with so and so and so. It's like, could we maybe think about doing an episode there, maybe later down? It's like, oh, we'll see, we'll talk about it. And then if it does happen, it feels like, yeah. So definitely the latter of the two options that you said. Leave some space for some things to breathe. I feel preferred, and also just because of where my background is in terms of like improv and comedy. As a GM, it's a little different. I feel like I think I need to have, like, as a player, I feel comfortable knowing maybe 70% of what I need to know to the end, like about my character's history and like whatnot right there before the first session. If I'm like the GM, I think I want to know closer to like 85, 90. I like maybe not everything that's going to be there for like down the season and what's going to come up, but particularly like when we arrive today, I want to be ready for what choices you might make, or be ready to also like throw it all out if you all really want to do something different. Like how to be ready to pivot, I think, is something that takes a little bit of, for me, mental capacity. I gotta like store a little bit in the back, be like, at any moment they could also just do something completely different. They could just not walk in north and decide to go a different way. And
players will do it every damn time. Mm-hmm. They love it
every time. They have a blast. Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll hear those great stories of like a DM who's got an encounter all planned out already. They've placed it all out meticulously. All the players need to do is follow the breadcrumbs right there. And then they have to write an entirely different encounter because the player decided, hey, those breadcrumbs are suspect. Let's forge this path over here through this marble stone wall, right?
Exactly. Let's see what's behind door number 7. There's only 3 doors. Well,
is there though?
Really?
It's D&D.
Exactly. Any window is a door.
Mm-hmm.
Also, what's at the bottom of that well back there? What? You said we passed the well. It's irrelevant.
It's been established.
I think there's something there. Yeah.
That's the thing. Players will always, and I know I'm guilty of this certainly as well, as players love to hone in on innocuous details. And then it's like, that's where that improv has to come in, because there's no way that you're going to come up with, a pre-planned story for this, a slightly orange rock by the side of the road. But, if you happen to describe it, if you make the mistake of just mentioning a little bit too much detail, then all of a sudden that's all they care about.
Well, listen, Arcad, I don't know what D&D campaign you're playing in, my friend, but everything that seems innocuous is never innocuous, and everything that is innocuous might not be innocuous later on.
True enough.
I don't know what DM you have, but my DM is evil in a great way.
Shout out to Asterix.
Asterix out there concocting some nonsense for Saturday. We love you, homie.
We love you, dude. So let's one of the big things that is really, really important to us, both Prime and I, and frankly all of our guests, is regardless of what you're working in, regardless of what system you're working in, regardless of whether it's a show or a table with your friends, online, offline, doesn't matter. Mental health of people and taking care of people's emotional well-being is such an integral part of really any endeavor, or it should be. And so for you, specifically when you're in the position of a DM, GM, keeper, whatever terminology you want to use, how do you keep your players safe mentally, and how do you sort of take care of them and make sure that they feel included and that they're in an inclusive and safe space?
Mm-hmm.
I think recently most of my GM, honestly, a lot of my role as a GM has been that of someone in front of an audience. And so part of it has been using the ability of whatever we think of as backstage before and after the performance. So if it's like, in some ways, just like checking in beforehand, like, hey, how's everyone doing? What's everyone at? Just sort of making sure that things are all right. And then afterwards, making sure that things, we're comfortable with folks. If folks were uncomfortable with like, sort of responding to that, and to what level. I also think, frankly, there's a lot of stuff that even happens before we arrive to play. From just going over people's like lines and veils, which are like things that, for folks who might not know, like what are things that they just don't cross, and what are things that can be alluded to off screen. Where are just people comfortabilities around that? I like to send that out to all my players, and get their like individual responses in a lot of ways, in terms of like romance options for like basically any way that they want to play, also leaving a space for them and be like, hey, by the way, I had this experience that that happened in a previous campaign, would love to avoid blah blah blah, like whatever it might be, leaving that as, for me, a reference in my notes, so I know as I'm building and like sort of creating things, and also right there, like when I'm doing improv, that's not a bucket I accidentally reach for in any capacity, just to like, there's a lot of other things to go to in that moment. I've unfortunately been privy to some bad improv shows, and I can tell when people are not playing to the height of their intellect, and in a panic and in a very like quick moment where they need to like feel like they need to answer something, will choose to go for whatever is easy. Sometimes it's we have a term for it, is playing blue, like playing like pretty dirty for a laugh, or playing or punching down for a laugh sometimes even, and yeah, that's just, it's not the best performance that you could give, it's not the best way that you could play, and so prepping yourself with tools like lines and veils, knowing where folks are seated before you go on, and also utilizing like X cards, if something happens on screen, like being able to just like no need to justify, no need to explain, just like, hey, something happened I didn't feel comfortable with. Having that comfort and availability to shift, yeah. I don't know. It's if people aren't having fun at the table, it's not a good time. And you got to make sure people are having fun by letting them be able to have fun.
Absolutely. And I think that, that point that you made there about kind of like punching deep for the joke, I think that that is so important to make note of, because I think that is kind of what separates, of course, everybody and whatever campaign they're doing or whether it's for content or not, everybody playing their characters, they're doing it to the best of their ability and things like that. But I think especially when professionally you are somebody who is an entertainer, you should be able to entertain people without needing to rely on those kind of slapstick sort of humor areas. And I think that it's actually quite a testament, especially for running a show that is, in front of an audience, to know that there are certain veils and certain lines that you need to keep in the back of your head while you're doing your improv and still respecting those. And I think that that's such an incredible thing to see. And I think that it's something that needs to be brought more into home games as well. You don't need to go for the laugh by crossing somebody's boundary. You don't need to go for the laugh by going for that ridiculous, edgy humor,
Exactly. Yeah. And something that I think is, just real quick, something that is especially important for, if you're listening to this and maybe you're a younger player or a player who maybe is, jumping into their very first kind of D&D and all you've read is horror stories on Reddit, it's like, recognize that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to talk with the people and share the things that are not okay for you. You've got to be able to discuss that because it's for your safety, and you never know, it's for the safety of the other people at the table too.
Yes. Yeah, no, 1,000%. There's options available to you when you feel panicked. And I think, if you're just aware of it before you enter that space, you can just perform better. I think a lot of times ignorance and pride stop us from just like playing well. And if you can fight both of those, then you're already on a great path.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. That's great. That is great advice, everybody. Listeners, that.
Yeah. Ignorance and pride, the two biggest downfalls, honestly, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with a lot of the stuff you've been doing here, and I kind of want to pick your brain a second here before I jump into this next question.
Sure.
Have most or all of the campaigns that you have run been a part of a greater whole? Like, have you started one from scratch yourself at this point?
Yes. Early on in pandemic, actually, I did my very first campaign that I GM'd, which were, my buddy, there was a group of us, who were a part of this directing fellowship at Second City based in Chicago. And, we were all sort of building these shows over the course of this year, to present to the producers there, to show them our work, to see if we'd be viable candidates for directors' positions within that institution in the future. And on our shows were set to open March 20th and run through April. Chicago shut down on March 13th.
No.
So we really were like, and we were about to enter Tech Week. We literally were about to enter Tech Week. Everyone's on the final like sort of hustle of getting everything together, and these other 5 people, the 6 of us, experienced something very, very particular that I didn't think like we, in terms of our other friends and other people that were doing with, like, I don't think could really understand to like the extent that we had been like building and like thinking that so much of our futures were determined on this like one show, and to have that because of something just like because of the pandemic just like taken away. We started playing. I was like, we should stay in contact. We should stay as a group in some capacity, just because we're not meeting in class anymore or watching each other's like casts do bits. Why don't we play D&D? And that was the first time I like really got a chance to be a GM in that space and like build that for these other individuals. That was like without the presence of a public eye. That was fun. I had a blast.
That's awesome. How long did you get to do it for?
So here's the downside of it, because it wasn't tied to something as a professional outspace. The campaign is still running, I guess. We haven't met in like 2 months because people have gotten life in the way and things are happening, and hopefully if things cool down, we'll get back to it. But I don't know. They were on a quest to find 7 magical artifacts, and they got to 6. So if they ever want to come back to it, I'm ready for them. I'm ready for them. Yeah.
It's hard as content creators to sometimes carve space for things because it's such a weird line of thinking, but it does sometimes. I think we all fall into it sometimes, where it's like it's very hard to justify making time for those things, even when you know that it's healthy to do so, even when you know that you should. It's hard to do it. It's really, really hard.
And then most of us do, those crazy things where we go, we want more D&D in our life, but we're going to be stressed if we're not creating content, so we'll just turn it into a podcast or a stream or a show.
Exactly.
And that is great, but it is true that adult schedules kill more D&D characters than a game runner ever could.
Right.
Oh yeah.
1,000%.
So with that in mind, believe it, that was the precursor question. With that in mind, do you have whether for a show or for an a non-show campaign, do you have a dream idea, like a germ of an idea that's been rattling around in your head for a while, that you're just like, in terms of the length, the progression, the story, the players? Obviously Steve Martin Short, they're on the wait list. We got this, but
thank you. Yeah.
But yeah, what's the dream?
We know
campaign?
You're listening. DM.
Thank you. Yeah, let us know. This is really hard. I think it's tough asking me this right now, because I just finished GMing like 2 very intense campaigns.
Yeah.
And I'm like I'm a little burnt out if I'm real, like doing those 2 simultaneously in terms of like what to do next as a GM. What would I really like to do? I'll also I think right now I kind of want to do, I know the folks who behind Kids on Bikes and Kids on Brooms did a Teens in Space game. And I think there'd be something really, really fun about exploring that world. Unfortunately, I've been chewing around the idea a lot in my head about how billionaires and their investment in space will instead of dealing with climate change, that's the thing that's money's going to be invested into as our escape route as our planet burns. And so what does that look like? Let's make fiction about it to handle my anxiety around my future. So maybe I think that'd be really fun to set it in the far, far future about from an Earth that is no longer present. What brands of companies made ships, and what sort of people made it out onto these ships, and what is that dynamic night as they're existing in space? What does the Tesla empire look like compared to the Amazon army, right? I think that could be I think that could be very fun. I don't think I could do it for a public space because I'd get sued very fast. But I would have a lot. I think that might. I think I just came up with it actually. That might be it. I think
you just came up with it.
That sounds incredible.
Oh my gosh,
it's very fun, and it's there's so much humor in that for me. I love, and you can always punch up at corporations. Of course, that's infinite punch up. Yeah,
that's the trick. Don't punch down, but you can punch up. Punch up as much as you want.
Please keep punching. They need it. But yeah.
Do. That's I love it. And I think you also came up with your title right there. As you were saying, watch the planet burn. I was like, planet burn. Okay.
Planet burn. That is good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
I love that.
Don't mind me. I'm taking some notes.
Just gonna write this down. There we go.
Yeah. Just I
love it.
Yeah, got that real fast.
So now it is time for Explain It in an Elevator. And here are the rules. So essentially, you are going to imagine that you're trapped in an elevator for 1 minute with somebody who's never heard of TTRPGs or your campaign, and your goal is to sell them on it. Are you up to the challenge?
I think so.
All right. The timer will start. When you hear the beeping, they are running.
Yeah. I'll give you a count in. 3, 2, 1, go, and then we will get rolling. You set?
Perfect. I think so.
All right. 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay. Imagine a town in Nebraska named Jenkins, but it's not really in Nebraska. Take the idea of the bubble or the dome, well, your favorite sci-fi show, M. Night Shyamalan Village-esque, and leave the idea that there's something more outside the edge. Now, take that and throw in a bunch of kooky teens, one of which is a very entitled rich boy. And what shenanigans do they get up to, uncovering the deeper mysteries that lie underneath their town? You gotta watch Generation Fantasy to find out, and the season finale is next Tuesday, so that's my plug for that.
That's a beautiful plug.
Amazing.
Yeah. I love it. Normally we would we'd wait out the timer, but I think you bundled that up. That is the mark of a professional. Just
that was
thank you.
A consummate elevator pitch. Okay, I'm sold. I'm sorry. Before you leave, could you give me that card? Could you write down am I watching this on Amazon Prime? Thank you. Okay, excellent. Sold.
I used to work in radio, so I've gotten I'm like very much aware of, and I feel kind of weird about this on this podcast. I'm like, man, I'm really talking for a long time some of these times, because I was like, yeah, there's a bit where I was like, this has been a minute, I should stop.
No, you're good. This is really, that is one thing that we love. Like, there's so few times in life where you get a chance to really just like jaw about whatever you're feeling and whatever comes into your head.
That's a great verb for it. That is a really great verb for it. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is the space we want to create. But with that in mind, we'll keep it rolling here. So one of our favorite questions that we love asking, and we're so excited to hear your answer to it, is what would you say is the weirdest character that you've ever seen in any of your games, whether you were a GM in that game, a player, whatever?
The weirdest character I have ever seen. I think I got to make this NPC in the last season of Rivals of Waterdeep. His name's Walter Hava, and he's an Aarakocra from the island of Schult, and Dahani, Latia's character, knew them from growing up, and it was fun to introduce this character who 100% lied about who he was, like presented himself as this like really devastating monk who is powerful about everything, and then you see him in person and like interact. That was so much fun. It was very weird to see their faces try to rationalize Walter, or as his nickname growing up, Baldo Waldo, because he's a bald ego. It's like it's a whole blast. Yeah.
That's amazing. And so was it also one where you had like just this, like a lot of fun playing as him, just getting to do like...
Yeah, I didn't even think about his voice before I got there, and then I was talking about him, and it kind of talked like a bird, and I was like, oh, this is so fun. I like, if I had known that from the start, I would have had a blast, but finding it within it made him just more rounded than I fully anticipated as like a wacky NPC.
I love that. That's incredible. Yeah. Oh, so good.
And so with handling this now, a lot of your experience has been on shows and has been on very, very live streamed kind of things, but how do you this is sort of a two-parter. How do you handle and how do you like to deal with conflicts or disagreements that come up between players? Like, because whether they like it or not, the GM, the DM ends up being the mediator, the parent at the table, if you will. And how do you find, for you anyways, that conflicts and disagreements are best handled? And I'm going to tack this on as well. How do you feel about PvP in TTRPG/D&D experiences, whether as a vehicle for that, not as a vehicle for that, separated from that? Just where do you sort of fall on that whole like butting heads kind of thing?
For sure. So conflicts and disagreements, I think I'm going to answer this in terms of like two levels, because I think what happens during the game is one thing and what happens at the table is another thing. Mm-hmm. And so if at the table, if there's conflicts and disagreements between players, unfortunately it does have to go through the GM. You're absolutely right, and it's tough and it's difficult. But I think in a lot of real ways, I was a pure mediator in middle school, and sometimes we have to talk about iceberg feelings. And I think like really like you just have to unfortunately like sit there and like the best of your ability try to get folks to talk about what's the real issue at hand and like really delve in. If you can't get that because of, want to remember again, ignorance or pride, that's going to be a difficult sort of situation. But if you can get through that, if you can resolve it, that's best resolved between the two individuals then like afterwards. I think there's like some level of like you're saying parenting that you have to do, but in terms of like the people, at least, and I'm gonna say this to folks who might be listening, the people I'm playing with are all adults. They're all well, at least adult enough, at least I think adult enough to handle their emotions and like situations as they should be, and I don't need to do that for them outside of the game. One, for my mental health, but like two, for also how they build a relationship. Like like you don't, yeah, you all fix it, like shake hands, go do what you need to do, like talk about it. So that's like at the table stuff. In terms of in the game disagreements, that's that once again through the GM, but like PvP in particular, like if you all disagree with something in the game, but at the table are like, hey, I'm good with us fighting right now. Like if I'm my metagame for a moment in some capacity, but I'm like, are you all okay that you're about to fight? And once again, this is going to go back to my thing that I mentioned earlier about lines and veils. One of the things I specifically ask folks for games that I'm involved in is, do you even like PvP? Like, do you want to see it happen? And for me, more often than not, a lot of people say no, unless then there's always that caveat, it serves the story's purpose. And like, I think and that when that is the only reason why PvP is allowed in your game, or like the only reason why people at your table would even initiate PvP, it's very much a communal conversation of being like, yeah, no, your character would fight me on this. Like he has been trying to hunt down this was it the Lich's phylactery this entire time, and my character took it because it might be the key to saving their people. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're like like there's true stakes, right? Like in a way that feels grounded and can take our story in either direction. But are both players cool with it? Are you all good with fighting one another right now? If yes, don't let me stop you. Like I'll be sweet, I'll be fair, but like we'll deal with consequences as they come up if you all are consenting to it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that's a great approach, honestly. And that sort of the caveat of if it serves the story, I think that's so crucial because, you know, if PvP is just for the sake of, again, pride or ignorance, right? Like my character could beat up your character, I'm going to prove it, blah, blah, blah. I think that gets a bit difficult. But if it is, you know, as you're describing, something that makes sense to the characters, to the story, it absolutely can be a plot device rather than a divisive thing that occurs, which is really important. And so as an experienced TTRPGer, what do you think new players should be mindful of if they're joining the D&D community? And do you have any thoughts on inclusion and diversity in the TTRPG space that you think people need to hear?
Okay, my thing about diversity and inclusion in the TTRPG space is the same thing that I will say about any space about diversity and inclusion, and that it should be there. You should have it. It should be present. Mainly for the fact that like you're gonna tell about a story from it. Like really, I hate to be so. I wish I could appeal to like human connection and compassion and all these other reasons, but like in a real, just like raw and honest way that I think some people need to hear is that the more people you have there, the amount of different eyes that you have on a project, the amount of different life experiences that can attach to it, the better you are to finding a solution and like telling the story that you want to tell through it. And I like, if the other things don't sell you on it, if the other things about like, you know, empathy and understanding and creating a space where everyone's welcome, maybe this will, in the idea that like you will just tell a better story. You will tell a better story if you have different people there, because there are so many things that are outside your singular perspective that you just cannot know until you don't know. Yeah. And then for new players, that's the main idea, is that be open to new experiences, be open to new things that could be happening, and play with an enthusiasm and joy about the play, you know?
I love that. And that's so important, because that's the thing too, right? Like, we all have our own individual experiences, but when you only use your own experience to try and tell a story, or to try and put an idea out there, or to try and do many things, you're only really going to reach people who have that same experience. And often, if you don't consider others and you don't have somebody else's perspective there, you unintentionally not only alienate so many people, but you make yourself and your story inaccessible to them. And that's just, I don't think that's usually what most people want, especially for their art. So
yeah,
honestly, I think that's the best approach to take to it, because I would love it to just be empathy too, but I'm on Twitter, so I know that's not always the approach.
I'm aware.
Yeah. I have a Twitter account. I know it's out there.
We've seen it, and it. I think that approach also is really good as well, because one of the less spoken about things that is super important is, you know, trying to avoid main character syndrome, right? Like, it's very easy, like in our lives, we're inside our bodies, we're inside our minds, we are, or at least we perceive ourselves to be the main characters of our own story. But especially in this sort of medium, it's vital, it's important that everyone there is equal and everyone there has an equivalent stake in the story, you know, because you can't have one person be more important than others or less important than others.
Exactly.
And to sort of like culminate, Masood, a lot of our discussion today into sort of distilling it down into its purest essence.
Oh, the hardest question.
Oh no.
What is it about this medium? You know, when you started getting into it, when the pandemic hit and when everything sort of like shifted gears for you, what was it about TTRPGs, GMing, and this medium that captured your interest and your passion and has brought you to, you know, manage 2 shows simultaneously, start to feel, you know, maybe a little burnt out, and yet still have an idea rattling around in your head that you're excited for?
Unfortunately, you're absolutely right. I think I've been thinking about this a little bit in terms of why I've felt really so much joy and comfort being in the TTRPG space. And that is, one, being a lifetime fan of games and like gaming, and in some capacity of like playing game, and also really, I think early on, like in high school, I knew that I wanted to be a storyteller. I didn't know necessarily how that would be, what that would manifest in itself, but I think the times that I felt the most joy, or felt places that I really, really liked, was when telling good stories. And finding the TTRPG space has allowed me to do that, and also experience the community story building that happens. Like that's the best thing about it. I think that is truly what it like keeps me coming back, and keeps me passionate about it, is as much as it is like getting to tell a story, it's the people I get to tell stories with.
Because that's the thing with the space, right? Like you know, if you were in high school and you thought, oh, I want to tell stories, and then you wrote a book, sure, you could write a book. Writing a book, more or less a pretty solitary experience. But
dude, I fell into stand-up for that exact reason, right? It was the closest thing I found at that like medium that I found that like allowed me to storytell. And even that, in terms of at least the way I was doing it and the way that I had experienced it, was so grounded in non-fiction that seemed fictitious versus doing like fiction that seems non-fiction, you know, which is a fun, different space.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. That's excellent. And so earlier today, I sent you a list of some phrases. Did you get a chance to look at those?
Oh, let me look. It messaged them to me. Let me see.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So I'll give you a second to read through the phrases. And then I'm going to ask you, what phrase on that list do you think applies most to your DM style?
Can I give 2 answers?
Absolutely.
I think everyone has.
I think my players would say I'm who's ready to die, which I'll take on the chin. I'll take on the chin. I put them in dangerous spots. But I think I would like to think I'm, well, hey, I'll let you roll for it.
Beautiful, beautiful. So we won't go and dive all the way into them, but essentially what I'll do is I will let you know what those 2 alignments say about your DM style, and then you can let us know if you think those are accurate. And so we'll start with I'll let you roll for it. And for I'll let you roll for it, that would put you as a neutral DM, true neutral. And so the idea behind that being that you take other game systems and you draw from them, you focus almost more on the story than necessarily on the rules, and your main focus is that everybody at the table has a good time.
That seems pretty accurate.
That
Excellent,
tracks.
excellent.
Yeah.
And then your second choice puts you as chaotic evil.
I feel like where I view myself versus how I'm viewed, that actually lines up pretty honest.
But honestly, I think in the D&D world, it's like we were talking about with that building tension. I honestly think that's a crucial part of a good DM, because the thing with that is, who's ready to die versus who has spare characters, right? It's kind of that idea of there's some chaotic and then there's like a true evil. And so I think chaotic is always more fun, right? Because you're not going into D&D or any real TTRPG usually because you want a linear sort of story. You want some chaos. You want that fear of death, because how else can you conquer? And so I think that sounds pretty good from what you've described. I would say that's pretty accurate.
Exactly.
I think you're spot on.
All right. And so our question for you today, listeners, because this is actually the first time that we've had somebody who hasn't fallen into sort of the full true neutral, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
It's, what do you look for in a DM? If you're out there and you're thinking to yourself, oh, I can't wait to get into another campaign, let us know. Let us know what kind of DM alignment you're looking for. Do you want something more linear? Do you want things to be easier? Do you want there to be that built up tension that brings those fun moments, brings those scary moments, brings that triumph? Let us know.
Definitely. And with that, Masood, we have pretty well reached the end of our show here, and so we want to give the floor out to you because I think you've got a lot of important stuff to share. So this is your moment. Plug what you want to plug, share what you want to share, tell people where they can find you, where they can find cool things,
where they can support your excellence.
Exactly. Yeah, plug away, my friend.
Thank you all so much for having me. This has been such a delight. I've had a true blast, and it has been wonderful that you all let me just pontificate about things that I like to think about already. So I really appreciate that. And for me, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Maroodboy, MaRudeboi. I wrapped up Rivals of Waterdeep, so you can go, if you go to our website, you can catch up on those episodes. I just wrapped up Monster of the Week with Sir Friday Night. That's over on Roll20's YouTube, so you can catch those VODs. And the last thing I've going on, I don't know when this episode's going to be released, but this upcoming Tuesday for me in my time will be the season finale of Generation Fantasy, and that's where I play Kent Vanderbuilt, and he's awful. And you can meet him and get to know more about him over on Roll20's YouTube as well.
Well, thank you again so much, Masood. Thank you for joining us, and everyone, thank you for listening, and we'll see you all next week. Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Romantic Dinner with the DM. We are so excited to have you on our journey as we learn about the worlds and stories created by dungeon masters and game masters in this wonderful, wonderful medium of TTRPGs.
We've got new episodes coming out weekly, and if you're jonesing for new content in between, check out our YouTube.
Link below.
And follow us on twitch.tv/Arcad and Prime.
We'll see you next week and really hope that you enjoyed the episode. Bye.